This is our first ever live show at CapeCon 2023. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. This is a little bit different episode. This is our very first live show ever at CapeCon 2023, Cape Girardeau, Missouri. We're doing our show. Hopefully some of our fans are tuning in from around the world that we have here, because most of our fans don't live in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. No. In fact, almost none of them do, it turns as it would turn out. But yeah, so we're doing our first live show here. We're going to get right into it. We're doing a little bit of a special episode. Before we get to that, we just wanted to introduce ourselves, if this is somebody's first episode, because this is going to be a bit of a primer on kind of what we do on the podcast. So Katie, why don't you go ahead and tell the people who you are?
Well, my name's Katie. I am the book person of our dynamic duo. I have a literature degree. I have a professional writing degree. I used to teach English comp at SEMO right down the road. And now I work in marketing as a content creator and a social media manager. And I co-host a podcast, if that's not the most millennial thing you've ever heard in your life.
Pretty much, yeah. So my name is Brian. I am the movie half of our podcast. I have a film degree from Southeast Missouri State, just down the road here. I've worked in video production for over a decade now in multiple different capacities, primarily as a writer, director, and editor and cinematographer. So that's a little bit of my background. I have more of a movie background. Katie has more of a book literature background, and that's kind of where the show came from. The premise of our show is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, so our show is essentially based around that common phrase that you hear really often about book adaptations, right? Oh, the book was so much better than the movie. So we decided that we wanted to see how often that was true, and if we could find the times when the movie was actually better than the book.
Which is more often than you think. We'll get to the actual numbers here in just a second. Well, actually, if we can find the numbers, because we don't have our PowerPoint. But so a normal episode of the show, which this is not a normal episode of the show. The normal episode of the show focuses on just one film, one book, or one film based on one book. And generally, Katie will read the book. I will not. And then we'll both watch the film. We do occasionally switch where I will read and she will not, and we'll both watch. It just kind of depends on what the book is, if it's something that's more my interest or whatever. And then over the course of the episode, we go through the film and the book, kind of frame by frame, page by page, break it all down, all the differences, all the similarities, and most importantly, try to decide if the changes that were made the film better or worse. Ultimately, we pick a winner and declare that either the book or the film was better. So we've done, how many episodes have we done?
We've done 158.
It's a lot of episodes
of this show.
Been doing this for like 5 years now.
Yeah. We've covered everything from sci-fi to romance to classic lit and graphic novels. I'm not sure if there are many genres that we haven't covered.
I truly don't think at this point that there's anything that we haven't done. I think we've really hit everything at this point. But tonight, like we said, this is a little bit of a different special episode. We're going to be doing something a little different. Just for CapeCon, we're going to be revealing and discussing our list of the 5 best and worst adaptations of all time, or at least the ones that we've covered so far, because obviously we haven't done everything. But we have done 158 episodes, and what was the number breakdown before we get into this? It was like 80.
Our number breakdown so far.
Our fans will be interested to hear this, because we've never actually done this on the podcast.
So it's 158 episodes, but 157 movies.
Yes.
Because we did The Princess Bride twice.
Yeah.
Because we liked it so much.
Yeah.
So out of those, 80 times the book has been better.
Yes.
66 times the movie has been better.
Yes, the movie has been better.
And there were 11 times when we either couldn't decide or we both read the book and disagreed.
Yeah, exactly. So far, the book is winning by a little bit. It's like 50 to 40.
Not by as wide of a margin as you would tend to think.
Yeah, you would think.
Based on like cultural conversations around movie adaptations.
Exactly.
But regardless of whether we ultimately choose the book or the movie, it doesn't mean that we think the other one was bad.
Usually. Sometimes.
Yeah.
But usually they're both bad. If one of them's bad, they're usually both bad. Usually.
But I would say most of the adaptations that we discuss, we actually enjoy both.
Yeah. Yeah, almost all. We're pretty
Mhm.
positive people. We tend to like most things, generally speaking. So it is pretty common that we enjoy both the book and the movie. But tonight we're going to discuss 5 of them that we did not like and 5 of them that we
Mhm.
really love. So let's get right into it and start with number 5 of the worst of the worst. It is The Black Cauldron: The Chronicles of Prydain. Katie, go.
So, The Black Cauldron is often remembered as the movie that almost killed Disney animation.
Yes, absolutely.
Infamous for almost taking out Disney animation.
Yeah.
It was not exactly a hit. Now, the movie on its own, you thought was not as bad as its reputation might make you think.
I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was great, but it was okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, from my perspective, having read the books, things started to get a little rough.
Yes.
Looking at it as an adaptation. So, The Black Cauldron is actually adapted from 2 books out of a 5-book series,
Yes.
which is called, like you said, The Chronicles of Prydain.
Yeah.
And essentially, what the movie does is take the first half of book 1, which is called the Book of 3, and then smash it together with the second half of book 2, which is called The Black Cauldron.
Yes.
And now, as you can imagine, this resulted in a little bit of a mess. The story is kind of hacked to bits. It's really truncated to the point that you almost can't tell what's going on at certain points. It kind of moves at like a breakneck pace. So there's really no time for really much needed elements like character arcs and relationship growth between characters. And the world building, which was incredible in the books, really suffered. And a lot of great characters ended up hitting the cutting room floor.
Yeah, my biggest problem with it, I remember when we were watching, was that I felt like the characters did not have enough time. I just couldn't really care about any of the characters because there's just like, there's too many of them kind of a little bit. And more than that, just nobody had enough time because the plot had to get done in like 80 minutes.
Yes.
So we did not have enough time to characterize people.
Yeah. Now, the main problem, in my opinion, is that an 80 to 90-minute children's film was just fundamentally the wrong medium for this adaptation. The Chronicles of Prydain deserves to be adapted as big budget prestige television. And that is a hill I'm willing to die on.
As everything does.
It's a fantastic series, and it deserves a better adaptation than it got.
Yes, we're hoping one day that will happen. I don't think there are any current rumors of that happening, but you never know. So let's get now to number 5 in the best category. We're going to start with Legally Blonde. Now,
if you didn't know Legally Blonde was a book, you are in good company.
Say you're not alone, because I had no idea.
Neither did we.
Yeah.
And it's honestly, it's not a terrible book, but it's not great either.
Yeah.
It definitely has some first-time author issues where you can tell that the author just hasn't been writing for very long.
Yeah.
And its plot is kind of meandering, wanders here and there, and we do a lot of side quests.
Yes.
And the movie really reins that into a much more concise narrative. There's a lot of cutting and condensing in a way that works really well. For example, the movie is much quicker to have Elle realize that Warner isn't worth her time, which allows us to then focus on more interesting and engaging plot points and character arcs. That movie also takes a much more sincere and positive approach to its treatment and portrayal of its female characters, particularly for the time period.
Yeah, that was a big thing that really stuck out to both of us.
Yeah, and there are a lot of kind of easy targets in this movie, right? There's a lot of sorority girls. We've got like the dumb blonde stereotype. Jennifer Coolidge's character.
Jennifer Coolidge playing Jennifer Coolidge, basically.
Yes, her character, Paulette, she's essentially trailer trash, the way that she's portrayed. And then Selma Blair's character, Vivian, is kind of like a frigid shrew stereotype at first. But the movie's approach to all of these characters is overall very kind and very nuanced.
Yeah, it really stuck out to me that they're like, especially because that was one of the things that stuck out to me was how well the movie had aged. The fact that it, like, for the time period, because when did this, it was like early
2004, I think.
It's like right in the period where these kind of movies are just like, you watch them today and you're like, oh no, this is the worst. It's like has aged so terribly. But that was not the case with this one. Like the feminism in the movie is like way ahead of its time. I don't want to say way ahead of its
Yeah.
time, but it's four movies of that time
Right.
period. It's ahead of its
It's
time.
ahead of its time. And that was something else that really struck us about that movie, and which I don't remember. Had you ever seen it
I had not,
before we
no.
did it? And
Mhm.
I had seen it, but it had been a very long time
Yeah.
since I'd watched it. And we were both struck by how the film really offered meaningful and very timely, for the time period,
Mhm.
commentary on like feminism and the idea of women supporting women and women working in male dominated careers. And a lot of that commentary was not really present in the book.
Which is interesting. That surprised me that it wasn't something that they pulled really from the book. But I can't remember who wrote that screenplay now, but it was somebody, wasn't it? Was it the woman who wrote or created Crazy Ex-Girlfriend or something like that? I think it might have been. Did she work on that? I can't remember now. I may be making that up entirely, so never mind.
But she also wrote, I can't remember her name. She followed us on Instagram.
Yes,
like after we covered this movie.
So I like to think
really
she
cool.
listened to the episode. She probably didn't. She probably just saw us posting about it on Instagram.
But I believe she also wrote Whip It and
that's what it was. That's
10 Things I Hate About You.
That's who. Yes. Sorry, I was thinking. I think there was some other movie we did that was yeah. But I think you're right. That was not that. Not that writer. But the other thing that really stuck out to me about Legally Blonde is that it really embraced like a positivity, and it celebrates positivity in a way that was kind of antithetical to movies of that time.
Yes.
Of the early 2000s, late 90s. Everything was like super cynical and nihilistic. That was what comedy was in that time period. But this movie was literally the polar opposite, which is
very sincere.
Yeah, it reminds me of something more like, because the answer to that in more recent like television and stuff is stuff like Parks and Rec a little, and those kind of shows that really lean into the positivity. And this was a movie doing that, 10 years before those other shows kind of came around to that, which was really impressive and made for a great adaptation. But that brings us to number 4 on our worst list, which is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children.
I cannot express to you. We saw this in the theaters.
Yes.
And I think we actually saw it before we started doing this show.
Yes.
And then had to go back and do it for the show, because I don't know if I've ever left a movie theater in such a frothing rage.
You were not happy
when we saw this movie.
You were not happy.
Now, we cover a lot of movies on this show that are able to capture the complex and interesting world building of their books. But Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children was not one of them.
Apparently not.
And part of the problem is that the plot of the book leans so heavily on the audience being able to understand the many detailed layers of the world building. And there's a lot of kind of like new concepts. So you're not leaning on like a cultural awareness of things like you can with something like Lord of the Rings or even Harry Potter. This has a lot of like new concepts in it. So
and it's weird.
Again, they are weird. The audience has to come in and you have to know what peculiars are. You have to know what hologhasts are. You have to understand how the time loops work. You have to get a feel for this entire alternate history that this story introduces. And the consequence of trying to cram all of that into a 2-hour runtime is a movie that feels disjointed and rushed.
Yeah. And I can't remember how much we did. This was one of our very early episodes.
This was like within our first 10 episodes.
So that was like 2014.
No, it was not that long ago. It was like 2017.
2017. It feels like a decade ago at this point. But yeah, it was like around 5 years ago. So I don't even remember how much I liked it. I think I enjoyed the movie more than you did, but I don't think I liked it. Was my memory like vaguely? I can't recall. But yeah, real quick, while we're here, we have some people in the chat. We got Matilde, Amanda, and Steve right now, at least all in the chat. If you are in the chat watching, leave a little, we'll say hi. To you. So thanks for joining us. Matilde said it's like a little Patreon meetup just for our patrons. Just go ahead.
Okay, so Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children is also a Tim Burton joint.
Yeah, very much so.
And listen, I'm a spooky kid. I can generally get on board with the Tim Burton aesthetic.
Right.
But I think it is fair to say that his movies often value style over substance.
When his worst movies do, yes. They try to get by on style over substance.
And unfortunately, this movie just needed way more substance than it got.
Yeah, I would agree.
And speaking of that Tim Burton style, one of the things that I think infuriated me the most about this adaptation was the number that style did on the heroine of the book, Emma. So in the book, she has fire-based superpowers and a personality to match. But Tim Burton heroines have a certain look and a certain vibe.
Yes.
They're doe-eyed, they're long-limbed waifs that are nothing if not delicately feminine.
Yes.
So in the process of making this Burton into a Tim Burton movie with a capital M, we lost everything that makes the female protagonist interesting. And instead of fire powers, she has the power of floating.
Yes.
Not flying.
Not flying.
Floating.
Which is one heck of a superpower.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little disappointing. All right, but that's it for number 4 on our worst list. Let's get to number 4 on the best list, and that is Stardust.
This is my favorite movie.
It's Katie's favorite movie.
Now, we don't always like tonal shifts in adaptations. When the book has like a
wildly
specific
different
tone, and then the movie has kind of a wildly different tone. But Stardust is the exception to that rule. So the book is an adult fairy tale. It's dark, it's gritty, it's adult with a capital A. The movie keeps a lot of the book's really interesting and unique world building, but it takes an overall more lighthearted and romantic approach to the story and the characters. So what we end up with is a classic action adventure fantasy romance.
Yes.
We get a swashbuckler.
Which
we love a swashbuckler.
We're a sucker for a swashbuckler. Like some of our favorite movies. Well, literally your favorite movie, and maybe my favorite movie, close in the top 3 or 4. So
the movie also bumps the humor elements of the story, bumps those up. So we get like the Peanut section, Greek chorus of dead princes in the background, as well as Robert De Niro's take on the fabulous Captain Shakespeare.
That was a surprise. I was not expecting De Niro to come out playing an effete captain. That was just not a thing that I ever expected, and it was a delightful surprise.
And the movie handles it really well, like something that could have ended up aging poorly.
Yes,
I think the movie handles it well.
You're right. That is another one of those where that could have easily
been really bad,
into a place that was not great, but it kept.
But instead, it's very charming and very sincere.
Yes.
The movie also makes good changes to the book's ending, in my opinion. The book's ending is a little bit anticlimactic in the way that traditional folktales often are.
Yeah.
The story kind of just ends.
Just kind of peters out.
The movie, on the other hand, gives us like a Hollywood grand finale
which you have
finish.
To have, obviously.
We get multiple sword fights. We get gruesome villain deaths. We even get like a voodoo doll controlled zombie sword fight. Wild. The end of the movie is crazy in the best way.
Yes. And by the way, Katie and I actually got engaged on the podcast at the beginning of that episode. So if you haven't,
we did.
You can actually go back and listen to that episode. And the beginning of it is me proposing to Katie. So
and all the confusion in my voice because I had no idea you were doing that.
Yes. Steve apparently just commented and said he thinks he knows what number 1 is. I'm interested if he thinks he knows the number 1 best or the number 1 worst. And if so, I would need you to leave it here. I would need you to put your money where your mouth is. Make that prediction right there in the comments. And let us know, because we'll otherwise you're just saying you know what it is and we don't know for sure that you do. Hey, Madison just jumped in. Hey, Madison, thanks for joining. All right, Katie, it's time to talk about now our number 3 worst adaptation of all time, or at least that we've seen so far. Cat in the Hat with Michael Myers. What a nightmare this is.
So hot off the success of Jim Carrey's How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Yes.
Universal got a brilliant idea. They decided we're going to try and replicate that success
with a different funny man
by letting Mike Myers run around in an absolutely terrifying cat suit, making off-color jokes for 2 hours.
Yeah,
that's what the movie is.
That's the whole thing.
That's the whole thing. The problems with the 2003 live action adaptation of The Cat in the Hat are truly legion.
Yes.
They range from lazy use of character stereotypes to a woeful misunderstanding of Seussian visual style to a plot that just couldn't stop raising its own stakes.
Yes.
But the main issue at the heart of it all, the burning molten center of the shitpost of a movie, is Mike Myers' cat.
Yes.
He is completely obnoxious. His jokes are not funny and they have aged like milk.
Yes.
And he doesn't manage to be endearing at the center of that like
No.
Jim Carrey did with the
Yes.
Grinch.
Jim Carrey has, there's an extra layer underneath Jim Carrey's Grinch and like a softness that makes that character work in that movie, even though it's not my favorite. Like that movie I think has a lot of mixed feelings amongst people.
It's got some highs and lows.
Yeah. And I overall like the Jim Carrey Grinch, but he's doing something a lot more layered and interesting than Mike Myers is doing with. Now, to be fair, it's also a more interesting character. The cat is just,
that's true.
To give a little bit of credit, the cat
is just kind of chaos incarnate.
Yes, exactly. Which, I guess he kind of did that, but it doesn't make for an interesting character necessarily in an hour and a half long movie.
No, it does not make for an interesting full-length feature film.
Yeah.
And what's really frustrating to me about that movie is that it actually isn't completely devoid of good ideas. Like
I don't remember any, but I'll take your word
introduce this conceit of the two kids needing to adjust their methods of having fun.
That's right.
To have healthy fun instead of destructive fun.
Yes.
Which could have been a really interesting and a very worthy thematic addition to the original text that could have worked really well with the original text. But it's just impossible to like anything about this film when you have Mike Myers in a cat costume screaming, "Oh yeah!" every 5 seconds.
I don't know why they decided he needed to be the Kool-Aid man. That was a weird
I'm
choice.
surprised Kool-Aid did come for them.
It is bordering on copyright infringement at some point, I would argue. But absolutely. All right, let's get to now our number 3 best adaptation of all time, or that we've seen so far, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I mean, no surprises.
No surprises there. Everything else on our list is like a singular book movie.
Yes,
adaptation.
This is the only one that's like the series.
We had to make an exception for Lord of the Rings because the entire trilogy is a masterclass on how to adapt a book into a film.
I would argue, yes.
So the films made some really great edits while being overall faithful to Tolkien's world and vision, and that is not an easy line to walk.
No, it really, and there's people that are upset about some of the things that were cut. I will go to war for Tom Bombadil like many others, but I understand why it was cut. I understand why some of that stuff was removed. I will say I do think the Scouring of the Shire probably should have. Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
it's been so long. I think that probably has a kind of an important thematic resonance that would have been nice to keep in the film. But other than that, I also understand why they got rid of that. But I think that was maybe the one that was like the hardest to lose. But overall, I thought just Peter Jackson and the other people who helped adapt that, I think, kind of made the perfect choices on what to keep and what to get rid of.
Yeah.
And what to kind of flesh out. Because some of that stuff and some of the characters in particular are just appendices characters that ended up becoming full-fledged characters in his films. And it's also another thing that we did not like about the books that much, that luckily, in our opinion, at least, that the film did a little bit better, is that I'm not a big fan of all the music, all the songs in the books. I hate reading songs. I really don't like reading songs, especially in Lord of the Rings for some reason. There's some okay ones, but in general, I'm just like, can we get to where you're writing more and not?
They're thematically resonant.
Yes.
Which is good, but they are kind of just a little bit of a drag to read. It slows the pacing down.
It slows the pacing down. My big problem that I always have with songs in books is that I don't know what tune to read them. Like in my head, I'm trying to imagine like what tune this is supposed to be to, and so I'm like I have to read them like a million times because like I'm reading through and I'm like, well, but that rhythm doesn't make sense. So it's just. I don't like reading songs. If it was a song, if I was doing the the audio version of the book and it was just sung, I think I would be okay with it. Like if there was like actual music and it was sung or something, I think I'd be fine with it. But I just don't like reading songs. Don't like it.
I might still fast forward through it.
In contrast, though, the film score is just perfection from beginning to end. I don't know if there's a better film. There are, but it's up in the pantheon of the best film scores of the last 20, 30 years for sure. It's fantastic. So.
Another thing about the Lord of the Rings trilogy is how fully committed to the aesthetic the production was. And it really makes Middle Earth feel like a real lived-in place.
Yes, like the sets and the props, like Weta Workshop did such a good job on everything. It feels so completely real, and it's really in contrast. We've only done the first movie in the
we did the first two Chronicles of Narnia.
The first two?
We did Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and we did Prince Caspian.
We have not done Prince Caspian.
We have absolutely done Prince Caspian.
That's the one with the boat.
No, we have not. That's Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
We have not done Prince Caspian. Is it part of the first movie?
No.
We have not done two movies of...
I am absolutely positive that we have done Prince Caspian.
We only did Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. It doesn't matter. I'll just continue. If you can find it, that's fine.
Right there.
What?
We've done it. It had Ben Barnes in it.
That has left my brain.
It was not a very memorable movie.
That's wild. Okay, anyways, keep moving on.
Anyway, the point to that is that...
I was going to say compared to...
Right. Compared to the Chronicles of Narnia, where the sets look good.
Yes,
they look fine. They look fine. They don't look bad, but they don't look ancient and lived in.
Yes, that was my big thing.
Lord of the Rings
too clean,
does,
which I think it's kind of it's intentional, but it just the cleanliness of everything, and it just all looks kind of like plastic and fake. Even when it looks good, it just doesn't look lived in the same way that the Lord of the Rings universe does in the films, which. It just really, it's one of those things that kept me from really like diving into the Chronicles of Narnia films. It's one of several things, but that was one of the things.
I have a belief that you have to get into the Chronicles of Narnia as a child.
As like a little wee lad.
Yeah.
That's not what I read as a kid. So.
No, but the other thing with like the overall aesthetic and the look of the Lord of the Rings movies is, and this is kind of in sharp contrast to a lot of movies that we have now, is how judicious they were in the use of CG tech that was available at the time and using it to enhance the practical effects instead of relying on it.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. The CG in that movie has aged like pretty much perfectly, which is pretty impressive considering.
Yeah.
It came out in 2001 or the first one came out in 2001 or 2000. I can't remember the exact year, but yeah.
Also a movie with straight up perfect casting across the board.
Yes. Literally.
Not a single thing I would change.
I can't think of a single role that I would recast in that series at all. Like I was trying to think of this when we were doing these notes. I was like, is there a single, because almost any other movie that's like an adaptation of something I really like, there's like usually at least one I'm like, I'm not a big fan. I don't think there's a single one.
And now I'm sure if we sat and thought about it, we could come up with other actors that we think could also do a good job. But I don't think there's anybody that I would like swap out.
No, there's no easy substitutions. That's for sure. Absolutely.
And to speak a little bit more to the book side of things for a minute here, something that often comes up on our show is how movies are frequently much more accessible than the books are.
Yeah, well, obviously, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that one of the strengths of this film series is how accessible it makes the stories.
Yes.
Even for an avid reader, Lord of the Rings is a challenge.
It can be.
They're dense.
Yeah, they're pretty dense, and they're more than anything. I think the thing that really like sticks out to me about them is they're they're kind of boring. I love them, but they're kind of boring.
They're kind of, there's a lot of extended description of trees.
Yeah,
and
which is fine. I like trees as much as the next person, but
not as much as J.R.R. Tolkien does.
Yes.
Nobody likes trees as much as him.
Yeah.
But the movies are just much more digestible.
Yeah.
While, again, staying about as close to the spirit of the books as an adaptation can hope to.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, we get that great scene in Two Towers where Aragorn dramatically throws open both of the doors at Helm's Deep, and that's a good scene.
It's a good scene.
It's a good scene.
It's a good scene.
It's a very good scene. All right, that brings us to our number 2 worst film or worst adaptation of all time, Ella Enchanted. Katie has a lot to say about this one.
I had a lot of thoughts about Ella Enchanted. Yeah. First off, there has never been a movie more ruined by the mere existence of another movie.
Oh my gosh.
Than Ella Enchanted was by Shrek.
It's crazy.
And now there are a few key elements that Ella Enchanted attempted to utilize.
They should sue Shrek for ruining their movie without even trying to.
All of these were not invented by the Shrek franchise, but they were popularized by Shrek during the early 2000s. Namely, the use of anachronism.
Yes.
Did I say it right this time?
Did you
anachronism?
Did you say it wrong in the episode?
I did.
I don't remember. Yes, you said it right.
The use of anachronism as world building. So
yes,
one example I had to look up a couple examples from the Shrek franchise. They have when they go to the Kingdom of Far, Far Away, there's a coffee shop called Farbucks.
Yes.
Instead of Starbucks.
Boo.
I know. So, you have this use of anachronism, right? Things that are out of their time.
Yeah.
And you use that as world building. And boy, did Ella Enchanted.
Yes. They use it way too much. It's truly infuriating and truly just look, I like Shrek.
I like Shrek too.
I think Shrek's great, at least the first one. I haven't seen the other ones in a long time because we did the first one on the podcast. Because it's based on a kid's book.
Yes, yeah, it's based on a picture.
So we did the first one on the podcast several years ago. But so I like the first Shrek. But man, Shrek working as well as it does is kind of a miracle. Was kind of a miracle. Trying to replicate that is like a true act of hubris. And Ella Enchanted should be ashamed.
Ella Enchanted impaled itself on its own sword.
Yes.
Another thing that they do that they stole from Shrek is ending the movie with a big song and dance number set to the cover of a pop song.
Absolutely.
The movie even goes so far as to add like a Lord Farquaad-esque villain that wasn't in the book.
Yeah.
And was also completely unnecessary to the story.
Yes.
Just there for set dressing.
Just there to be there. Because they felt like they needed
that. I don't remember if we talked about this in the original episode or not, but there's even a scene where Ella does like kung fu out of nowhere.
Yes. No, I think I brought that up because that was very much like the
Princess Fiona does in Shrek.
Where she does the Matrix stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now listen, this movie might stand on its own okay. I'll never know because the book has been one of my favorites since I was a preteen.
I will say Steve just said that Ella Enchanted is tough for him because he liked the movie except for the ending, except for the dance number. So
the dance number is pretty bad.
I don't know.
I
assume Steve hadn't read the book, so he's just voicing his opinions on the film.
Yeah. But the movie, in my opinion, just does such a massive disservice to its characters and to the relationships between characters. Ella is a very watered down version of the smart, independent heroine that we get in the book.
Yeah.
Mandy is reduced to almost nothing. Mm-hmm. You called her that fairy lady in our original episode, and that infuriated me because she's a great character. The relationship between Ella and the prince goes from them falling in love over the course of several years in the book to like insta-love that happens within the span of a few days. Just really this very watered down version of what we get in the book. Like Ella Enchanted went so hard trying to chase current trends that it ended up undermining everything that made the book powerful, subversive, and meaningful to little girls who were raised on a steady diet of princesses.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's Amanda in the comments said that she was surprised that she thought that was going to be number one. What's Ella Enchanted? She said a horrible movie from an absolutely amazing book. So she was surprised that you didn't make that number one. We'll get to number one. It has its own reasons for being
Yeah.
there. So are you ready for our dark horse number 2 best movie, best adaptation of all times? I think our listeners may have an idea what this could be, but it is our number 2. It's the adaptation that nobody would ever expect would make the good half of our list. But that's right, baby. It's 50 Shades of Grey. Best number 2 film adaptation that we've ever done.
50 Shades of Grey. This movie improved on the source material so wildly that it is almost indescribable.
It truly blew our minds.
I mean, we did go on to describe it for like 4+ hours.
For each episode.
But it's almost indescribable how much better the movie is than the book.
And it's truly one of those things where the book is so bad, it is so terrible. All 3 of the books are so terrible. We're specifically here talking about the first one, 50 Shades of Grey.
We could have made this another trilogy entry, but the first movie in particular is so
better than the other ones.
Much better than the book and so much better than the other 2.
Yes. Like there are tons of things that it fixes. It fixes like continuity issues that are constant throughout the books. It fixes a bunch of timeline issues and change. There were so many times where things needlessly happened like right on top of each other and were explicitly stated to happen right on top of each other in a way that you're like,
in a way that like made no sense.
And the movie, by just not telling us when things happen, just like literally leaving out information, which is often a problem in movies.
But here it worked really well.
So bad. Yeah. So they fix a lot of continuity and timeline issues. They also remove just so much extraneous material that is not needed, or not relevant.
That book, the first one, I don't remember how many pages that clocked in at, but I was almost 500.
It's like 4 something.
They're long books.
It's a nightmare.
And the actual plot of the story, maybe 100 pages.
Oh yeah. Tops. Which and you know, you get like, it is what it is. It's a smutty romance novel. Like we get we knew what we were getting into. But that being said, it's not even like the other unnecessary 400 pages are all like romance scenes. That is not what the rest of the book is. I mean, it's a
smutty romance that's not particularly good at being either romance or smut.
Yes.
So make of that what you will.
Yes, absolutely.
Another thing is that the movie really does not take itself too seriously.
Yes.
It really like leans into the silliness that's kind of inherent in the entire concept of 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, the movie or the books take themselves so deadly seriously. Oh my God. They I mean, and which is wild for what they are, which was starting as it's wild that a book that started as Twilight fan fiction can take itself so seriously, but somehow what is her name? E.L. James.
Oh,
somehow she pulled it off. And those books take themselves so seriously, but the movie, and specifically the actors, but the movie itself, even the direction and writing, knows what these movies are. And they really just, like you said, they lean into the silliness of what we're doing here. They kind of lean into the tongue-in-cheek nature of what this all is. Dakota Johnson in specific knows exactly what role she's playing, and she has so much fun with it in this movie. There's some great moments that are moments from the book that are just, they make you roll your eyes so hard in the book.
Yeah, and they're taken so deadly seriously. Yes. And the dialogue is so cheesy and the narration is so cheesy, but it's taking itself so seriously that you're reading it and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Yes, but the movie, and specifically Dakota Johnson in those scenes, she is also rolling her eyes at the movie.
Yeah.
You can feel it through the screen and it makes the whole thing just work so much better. They also soften up. So Christian is the male protagonist, or whatever. The male main character.
Lead male character.
Yes. And he is a nightmare person in the books, like just the worst person ever. And he's still pretty bad in the movie, but like way better.
But like way not as bad as he is in the books.
Yeah, they've softened him up so much to where he doesn't feel like a complete monster, which is nice.
Small miracles.
Yes, small miracles.
Another thing that made this movie really great is that it mercifully deprived us of Anna's inner monologue.
Yes, which
So,
is like arguably the worst thing about the book is that we're in Anna's head
yeah,
the whole time.
the books are first person narration.
Yes.
So we're in Anna's perspective the entire time.
Yeah.
And she's got a lot of thoughts.
It was some of the worst written and silliest stuff in the whole series. Is all of this is like what Anna is thinking, because she has these characters.
She has these characters in her head. She has her subconscious who judges her for being into Christian.
Yes.
And then she also has her inner goddess.
Yes.
Who really wants to get with him and does a merengue.
Yes. With salsa moves, I believe is the way it's written in the book, which is terrible.
And that's not even the tip of the iceberg of what made her perspective so awful to be in. It's honestly wild how much more likable Anna is as a character once you aren't privy to every single one of her thoughts.
Yes.
And it's interesting because 9 times out of 10, removing a character's narration, we think makes the movie worse.
Yeah, like it makes it harder to get you to connect with the character, because like obviously generally it's better the movie. Yeah, we don't want like a voiceover narration.
We don't usually want a voiceover narration, but you do lose out on a lot of depth and nuance when you lose that character's perspective. When we covered The Hunger Games, we talked a lot about how, the movies did a really great job, but not being inside of Katniss's head, you lose something that is really important and integral to the stories.
Yeah.
But that was not the case here.
No. No, not at all. Like the other thing that was crazy is never in the history of cinema has a movie benefited so much from binging the source material immediately before watching the film. Because we would read the whole book in like a couple days and then watch the movie, and it's truly mind-blowing how well, because so many times watching the movies we would pause and go, oh my, that's so much like literally out loud to each other we would go, that's so much better, oh that's so much better than what they did in the book. We would have like physical reactions to them. And
the thing of it is that 50 Shades of Grey isn't even that incredible of a movie on its own.
No, it's not good.
Like it's fine.
I would say it's pretty not good. But yeah.
It's not awful, but it's not great
either. No, it's not even good, I would argue. It's like right on that like 6 out of 10 ish.
But compared to the book,
yes,
it's a masterpiece.
Oh, it truly
it belongs in a museum.
Yes.
If I were teaching a screenwriting class, 50 Shades of Grey would be on the syllabus, full stop.
Yes.
This is how you do it.
Yeah, completely. All right. It's now time. We're getting to our number one. Before we do, I just want to say, hey, Trevor. Hey, bud.
Hi, Trevor. Some of you might remember Trevor as the Muggle.
Yes, he was the Muggle on our Harry Potter episodes.
Series.
Absolutely. One of the groomsmen in our wedding. So there you go. Thanks for. So was Amanda, who was here. So no.
Yeah.
I lied. Yes. Yeah. I can't. There's too many people in the. Just ignore me. All right. It's time for our number one worst adaptation of all time, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief. Go, Katie.
Okay. So the major issue, I've summed it all up, that I have with this adaptation is that it is downright disrespectful of the source material. Yes. So when you're reading Percy Jackson, you can see the level of work and research that Rick Riordan clearly put in. But you can tell that the movie obviously does not value that work.
Yeah.
So, for example, when our heroes visit the underworld in this book/movie, in the book, it's specifically mentioned that Persephone, Queen of the Underworld, is not there at that time because the story is set during the summer. And if you know anything about Greek mythology, that makes sense because it's a major part of that story that Persephone only lives in the underworld during fall and winter.
Yes.
Right. So we have that level of like research and care
Yes.
that Rick Riordan, the author, put in
Right.
to crafting this world.
Mm-hmm.
The movie not only puts her in the underworld, it has her do like a weird bait and switch that really comes out of nowhere and then acknowledges its own error by having her say, the only thing I look forward to is my allotted time away, which is supposed to be right then.
Which is right now.
It's right now. You're not supposed to be here right now.
Yeah.
So the Percy Jackson books are maybe more so
probably more than
in 2010 incredibly popular, and the studio had the opportunity to have a major hit with a huge franchise because there's a ton of Percy Jackson books.
Yeah.
But they seemed to struggle with a fundamental lack of understanding of the source material and its characters.
Pretty much entirely from what it sounded like, yeah.
Yeah. And obviously there are going to be exceptions to this statement, but I have yet to encounter a Percy Jackson fan who thinks this movie is a good adaptation.
It's wild. I don't know if there are any. And if your built-in fan base won't get on board, your franchise is dead in the water. Yeah, it's crazy because even some of the worst, so we just did the Diversion series this summer, which is, according to a lot of people, not a good adaptation. They're not good movies. They're not particularly good books in our opinion, but they're also just not, they're like mediocre adaptations of mediocre books. But there are fans of those movies, and those, but like there are people who like both the books and the movies a lot. And I think it's not a ton, like there's a lot of people who are fans of the books who don't like the movies, but I'm sure they're out there for Percy Jackson, but it's gotta be like 12 people.
It's wild to me that they even made a second movie.
All of them are here in the audience tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The book, the Percy Jackson and the Olympians, also included a scene set in St. Louis.
Yes.
That the movie moved to Nashville.
Yeah.
And as native St. Louisans, we just can't get behind that.
No.
We can't support it.
Can't do it. But luckily there is a new series coming out on Disney Plus, right?
I think so.
Soon. I think a trailer just came out recently. So hopefully it's good. We'll see. I don't know. I haven't actually watched the trailer yet. I think I heard mixed things about the trailer, like mainly about the CG in the trailer. Because I think Rick Riordan is like pretty involved in this adaptation.
That's good because I believe he disowned the movie.
Yeah, I thought I heard that he's pretty involved in this one that's coming out, but I could be wrong. I don't remember for sure. All right, but that brings us right to it. The number one best adaptation of all time. The film's so nice. We've done it on this podcast twice. It is The Princess Bride. I mean,
what is
what else could
there to say?
What else could it have possibly been?
Well, we could say some things.
Yeah, we got some things to say.
So part of what makes The Princess Bride an incredible adaptation is that it's actually functioning as like an additional editing pass.
Yes.
On the original story from the book.
Yeah, because if you don't know, the film The Princess Bride was written by William Goldman, who is a screenwriter, who is the person who wrote The Princess Bride, the novel.
Yeah.
So he's literally he was a person who wrote both novels and worked in film on screenplays very famously. I think won an Oscar for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, I think. And he's done a bunch of other stuff, but Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and Princess Bride are probably his two most known movies, but well-respected film writer and very well-respected novelist. And so, he got to take a second crack at his own book, which was already kind of this weird meta thing. And then he made it even more meta.
He made it even more meta.
Yeah.
He really approached that with the right amount of enthusiasm,
right.
I think.
Absolutely.
And even just as a movie on its own, The Princess Bride is what I would call a perfect storm.
Yes.
It was made in exactly the right place at exactly the right time.
Yeah.
It's a comedy masterclass. It is perfectly, exquisitely cast.
Again, it's another one. Like Lord of the Rings.
There's not a single actor that I would swap out for somebody else.
No, every single role is iconic.
Yeah. And the ambiguous, like Ren Fair, vaguely Europe in the Middle Ages vibe, and then the fact that it occasionally looks like it was shot on the set of a community theater production of Robin Hood.
Yes.
all just adds to its
It
charm.
really does. It's like we talked about in the episode, or at least in the second one, maybe both of them. I can't remember. So if you don't know, we did this as our very first episode ever. And then for our 100th episode, we revisited it and I read it that time just because we wanted, like a fun little thing. And we talked about in at least one of those episodes that it's particularly the sword fight scene at the top of the Cliffs of Insanity. Like the sky it's so clearly a sound stage. Like it's the most soundstage looking set you've ever seen. You can see
the sound stage like moving under their feet as they're
crazy.
Doing it.
But it actually makes the scene better because it adds to like the storybook nature of kind of like what the book or what the film is doing. It's so good. And it also, speaking of that fencing scene, it has some of the best fencing scenes of all time in movies, in our opinion. So Bob Anderson worked on that film. I think we talked about this in the episode.
Yeah, I think we did.
Bob Anderson worked on that film, and if that name is familiar to you, it should be. He was the sword master on this movie, Princess Bride, The Three Musketeers, which we've also done on the podcast from 1993, The Mask of Zorro, and The Legend of Zorro. Those are the two with Antonio Banderas from the early 2000s. All three of the Lord of the Rings movies, Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, and he's the stunt double for Darth Vader in the original trilogy. The man was a legend.
This is the sword fight man.
Yes, he is the guy.
Yes, he's the guy. If you need sword fights in your movie, this is the guy.
I will say there was somebody else who worked with him on Princess Bride. I know for sure. I can't remember the guy's name. There was two of them, I think, who choreographed all the fights in Princess Bride, but he's the one who gets all the recognition because he went on to have this huge, big, long career. But like every single one of my favorite sword fights in movies are pretty much at least somewhat his work, because Pirates of the Caribbean, Lord of the Rings, this movie, all are just incredible. And we talked about in our Three Musketeers movie, you can even see like some of his fencing moves carry over from movie to movie. If you know Bob Anderson fencing in movies, eventually you can kind of see the stuff that carries over from film to film. But the other thing about this movie, and obviously goes without saying, but it's like maybe the most quotable movie ever made, or at least for some people. I'm sure there's other ones that get up on a near level, but this is got to be up there.
I don't know if there's a way to quantify and measure that, but if there were, this one would be at the top, if not the top.
Yes, I can't think of many that are much higher. There are some, but it's I think it especially in this realm of like fantasy adventure films, it's probably number one. There might be some niche comedies or something that for some people are like Ghostbusters or something, maybe, but other than that, I can't think there's anything else that's even close.
Yeah. In my opinion, The Princess Bride is the gold standard of adaptations.
It really is.
The book is incredible.
Yeah, the book's great. Honestly. That's the thing. Yeah, the book is also amazing.
Great. Like if you like this movie, highly recommend reading the book.
Because it adds a lot more, there's more detail and nuance, or not nuance, but there's more detail, and it fleshes out some characters and fleshes out some storylines and some stuff that is not in the film. But none of that takes that stuff not being in the film doesn't hurt the film at all. No. It's just a little bit of added, fun stuff in the book.
Yeah, the movie really takes that source material and improves on it in every way possible.
Yeah.
From the writing to the production to the actors themselves.
Yes, absolutely. So that's it. That's our list. Those are our top 5. We'll post this somewhere on social media for our listeners in case you want a little visual recap of what our top 5 best and worst adaptations of all time were. Also, this episode will eventually release on our podcast feed for everybody. We're going to get the file from them and release it for all of you, probably when we're on our honeymoon at the end of October.
Probably.
So that's kind of our plan for that. But that's going to do it. I'm going to make sure nobody else has anything to say here before we wrap up. Okay. Amanda says she quotes Talladega Nights a lot more, but Princess Bride is a far superior film. Or sorry, she didn't say she quoted it a lot more. She said she quotes it a lot, but that Princess Bride is far superior. Steve said he loves the tongue-in-cheek nature of Princess Bride, especially loves how they trolled us for the sequel, Buttercup's Baby, which we talked about in the episode. But yeah. Matilda did say that they will never subject themselves to 50 Shades books or
Please
the movies.
Don't.
You don't need to. But that our episode on it is maybe one of our best and most fun episodes for them to listen to. So
thank you, Matilda.
Thank you, Matilda. And thank you, everybody who joined us here in the live chat for this live, our very first ever live episode of, we've never done a live episode.
We've never done a live episode.
Yeah. So our very first ever live episode on location at Cape Con 2023. There'll be more podcasts, I think, throughout the week. And if you want to come back to the same page, you can watch, I don't know who, there's a bunch tomorrow and then some more on Sunday. So come back and check those out and hear some more people talk about, I'm sure mostly nerdy stuff would be my guess because it is at a Comic-Con, but I don't know exactly what everybody's talking about it. But again, that's going to do it for this year for our Cape Con 2023 special and our very first live show ever. Until next time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, everybody else,
Keep reading books.
keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.